We are continuing a series of sermons through the book of the Revelation to John. A challenging book, to be sure. And I just want to give you a picture before I read the text, because we're kind of getting down to it now. I want to give you just a couple of thoughts about it as you listen. So we began with the vision of Christ. And then Christ offered 7 letters to the 7 churches. And it seemed like Christ was on the outside, knocking on the door to get in, because they'd shut him out. They were under different kinds of pressure. Our gaze then went to the throne room scene. And we found the ruler with a scroll that was sealed shut with 7 seals. And the thing is, an emperor sends his orders out to generals that way, so we needed a general who had the authority, was worthy to break the seals on that scroll. We heard about a lion that could do it, and then we saw a slain lamb. It was the power that moves from death to new life that could open these seals. So they began to open, and what I said is, from here on out, it's as though we're going to look at this as though it's a movie on a rear projection screen. You know, how we can project a movie onto and see it from behind. And so we run through these 7 seals as they're unfolded, and we see this movie before us. And we saw the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, existential risk, and so on. Then we lift up the screen, and there's another screen behind it. All right, and this screen is going to run the same movie, and it's going to have trumpets announcing each moment of judgment that comes. It's repeating patterns. Now, the 7th seal began the 7 trumpets, and the 7th trumpet will bring us to a new moment where we're going to lift the screen again, and that's today's text. And we really are getting down to it now. We begin to see really clearly what the powers are that are fighting against the God of history. And one other thing I'd like to tell you about is that near Patmos, where this was apparently written, there's an island called Delos. And everybody back then would know what it was. It was where Leto went when Leto or Leto, I'm actually not sure, but went. Zeus had impregnated her, and she was going to be Apollo's mother, and she hid from Python, this huge dragon that was going to devour Apollo. And so she hid there to protect the child. Now, the Caesars liked to see themselves as Apollo, as the ones that could bring the golden age forward. And so they would call themselves the light and the sun of the world. And so in this particular section, you might get the impression that the author of the Revelation to John doesn't see it quite that way. Will you listen to the word of God? Then the 7th angel blew his trumpet, and there were loud voices in heaven, and God's temple was opened, and the ark of his covenant was seen within his temple. There were flashes of lightning, rumblings, peals of thunder, an earthquake, and heavy hail. A great portent appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. She was pregnant, was crying out in birth pangs, and in the agony of giving birth. Then another portent appeared in the heaven, a great red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 diadems on his heads. His tail swept down 1/3 of the stars of heaven and threw them into the earth. Then the dragon stood before the woman who was about to bear a child, so that he might devour that child as soon as it was born. And she gave birth to a son, a male child, who was to rule the nations with a rod of iron. But her child was snatched away and taken to God and to his throne, and the woman fled into the wilderness, where she has a place prepared for her by God. And war broke out in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon. The dragon and his angels fought back, but they were defeated, and the ancient serpent, who is called the devil and Satan, the deceiver of the whole world, he was thrown down to the earth. Then I heard a loud voice in heaven proclaiming, "Woe to the earth and to the sea, for the devil has come down to you with great wrath." Then the dragon took his stand on the sand of the seashore, and I saw a beast rising out of the sea, having 10 horns and 7 heads, and on its horns were 10 diadems, on its head was blasphemous names. And the beast that I saw was like a leopard, its feet were like a bear's, its mouth was like a lion's mouth, and the dragon gave it its power and his throne and its great authority. One of its heads seemed to have received a death blow, but its mortal wound had been healed. In amazement, the whole earth followed the beast. Then I saw another beast that rose out of the earth, and it had 2 horns like a lamb, and it spoke like a dragon. It exercises all the authority of the first beast on its behalf, and it makes the earth and its inhabitants worship the first beast, whose mortal wound had been healed. It performs great signs, even making fire come down from heaven to earth in the sight of everyone. And by the signs that it is allowed to perform on behalf of the beast, it deceives the inhabitants of the earth, telling them to make an image for the beast. This beast is the false prophet. The name of the beast, or the number of its name, this calls for wisdom. Let anyone with understanding calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a person. It is the number 666. Then I saw the beast and the kings of the earth with their armies gathered to make war against the rider on the horse who was coming down from heaven and against his army. And the beast was captured, and with it the false prophet. These 2 were thrown alive into the lake of fire that burns with sulfur. Well, the grass withers and the flower fades, but the word of our God does indeed stand forever. Ronald Reagan, upon hearing this passage at one point, said, "I don't know about you, but I certainly believe that those times have come." He was wrong. But he was in pretty good company. Christopher Columbus apparently said something like that. So did Martin Luther. So did Isaac Newton. So did John Wesley and Jonathan Edwards and, well, Jerry Falwell. They were wrong. Either that or all of them were right. They were all right. Because what this talks about is a condition of human history. It's what happens in human society, the way these powers unfold, because we are subject to tyrannical rule, human beings are. We fall for it every time, it seems. It's how this genre started, this apocalyptic literature with all its fantastic symbols. The people of Israel had managed to pull together 12 tribes and had a nation that stood strong. But it couldn't stand strong against empires. That is to say, an empire is a nation of nations, huge military powers coming against them. They couldn't imagine how they were going to handle all of that tyrannical power coming their way. And it was in that context that apocalyptic literature was created. It's how the genre came to be, because it's enormous. We're subject to tyrannical forces. Of course, it's not just in politics, though that's probably most of the focus in today's sermon. We're subject to other tyrannical forces. I couldn't help but notice that there's been case after case after case of the abuse of women coming across my news feed over the last couple of weeks. This is tyrannical power at work. Violence brought on somebody else to control what it is they will do. Making somebody feel like they can't leave because there was something important to life in the relationship. If you're outside, it doesn't seem that way. But if you're inside, it can. And this whole thing, this tyrannical power that builds in our society, it seems to reach into every sphere. It's not just the entertainment sphere, it's everywhere we seem to go. 1 in 4 women suffer some form of spousal abuse. Pretty extraordinary. We are subject to tyrannical powers. But what's behind it all? What are the powers behind it? That's what this is all about. We've raised the screen one more time, and we can see it with some clarity. We see the serpent or the dragon, who is the deceiver, the one who doesn't tell the truth. Thucydides, one of the first historians of humankind, said that when truth breaks down, so does the society around it. And the deceiver tears things apart, and it also devours any new life. Understand what was coming from the woman was new possibilities and new life. And this dragon, this deceiver, wanted to destroy it, wanted to destroy progress, the progress of God's creation that's drawing things together in perfect harmony. And this dragon is thrown to the earth and then rises up. Two beasts. First, we have the beast of the sea. It's got crowns and blasphemous names. It represents Caesars, the Caesars, because Caesar, after all, said that he was a god. It's a blasphemous name. We know from Daniel that anytime you talk about the beasts that are around, the lions and the bears, that we're talking about empire power. So we're talking about the Roman Empire here. And in particular, this wound, the wound on the head, that's Nero, because Nero was said to have killed himself, but to have survived and lived on. What this referred to. So what we're talking about here is political power, which is to say, the power that human beings have over one another to control them. An effort to control other human beings. And then comes up the beast of the land. It's a false prophet. And it speaks for the emperor. In this case, there's some imagery that I didn't read to you about that has to do with the fact that the false prophet controls the economy, almost acts like a bank for Caesar, and that's the way it was. Right? People who weren't a part of the system and the society, who didn't worship Caesar, couldn't be a part of the economic activity of that community. So we can see that there's a false prophet, this second beast, the beast of the land, that sets up an idea, sets up a meaningful thing that we're supposed to reach for. Human beings seem to need religion. Human beings seem to need something that we can reach towards, some reason for being, some reason that's going to help us navigate our lives, some way to remove our fear of death. Human beings have that tendency. In fact, the modernist will say that all religion is simply a human construction and it's make-believe. I would beg to differ. Human beings do indeed create religion. That's what we do. But it is that very religious impulse that God uses to draw us into relationship with God. It's not all religions that are made up, but the impulse serves us well when we are seeking the truth of the one who is unfolding creation from death to new life. This serpent, this dragon, establishes these powers around us, this coercive power, and it lies to us about where our security comes from and what's important in our lives, why we're living our lives. Don't we have something like that in our world now? We're told we're not here to love. We're told we're here to take care of ourselves. That seems to be the religion of the day. Of course, there are a lot of religions out there. Lots of people that are trying to make religion in their own image, make society work. So I want to be clear about something in this sermon. It's not a problem here, but you may encounter it. I want to talk just briefly about Christian nationalism. The effort of a Christian church to paint a picture of a world where God will use authoritarian leaders to create their view of what a Christian society should look like. Christian nationalism is a disease. That view of religion and that view of God is frankly born of the devil. And at some point, you have to call it that. We're all going to vote sometime over the next weeks. Maybe you already have, I don't know. And while I have strong feelings about how I'm going to vote, I'm not going to tell you how to vote from a pulpit where I'm speaking God's word. Because there are lots of possibilities for how we understand what God is doing at this moment in history in our country. Sometimes it's easy to know where the beasts are working and where the beasts are unfolding their terrible ways. It's easy when we look at what Putin's doing. Easy when we see what Hamas did on October 7th. It's getting a little murkier with Israel. Murkier in the U.S. as well. But as we come to vote, you and I, we have a responsibility as citizens of the kingdom of heaven. We need to be aware of the conditions of history that we are living in. We are living in the conditions of history where these tyrannical powers do in fact take hold. And we have a responsibility to try and figure out what's going on. But be assured of one thing: they will be defeated. They are always defeated. The powers that try to suck us in and control us are eventually always defeated. That's true for the great political climate and true for the power in a family dynamic that's working. So let's be aware as we come to these moments of decision that these powers will be defeated, but you and I are there to seek insight into what God is doing here. You can have different political prescriptions or policy prescriptions. In fact, some of the policy prescriptions of Christian nationalism I don't have a problem with. So we can do it differently, but we're looking for what God wants. And the revelation to John is here to encourage us in such moments as we evaluate, try to understand what our responsibility is. We can discern where we stand. We have two images to help us with that here. The seventh trumpet blew, and what did we see? The Ark of the Covenant. The Ark of the Covenant, the very center in the Jewish faith of where God reaches into creation. They talk about it's where God kisses the earth. The angels, wrapped up in one another, Jewish mysticism sees them in a very close and intimate embrace. Within the ark are the two tablets of the law. We're there to seek our love for God, and we're therefore there to seek love for one another. We're putting value into creation everywhere we go. We look at the ark and we know the direction that God is going. We look at the woman and we know God is in the process of doing something generative, moving us from one place to another, making us more and more whole. With those two images, we can look at the landscape around us and begin to get a sense of what we'd like to do about it, where we would like to stand. It's not just about voting. It's also about where we stand whenever we see tyranny working, whenever we see that coercive power moving into people's lives and shutting them down. Where do we stand at that moment? We stand with God. We stand on the plateau as the trumpets are sounding, and we're with God's purpose and strength. I said last week, and I've said it before, we're not here to live long, comfortable lives. We are here to live lives that serve God's purpose, that take stands against the powers of tyranny in the world, that are willing to serve one another and care for one another, These are not simple answers, but they are places to stand. Ronald Reagan was right. We are in those times. We're always in those times. And you and I, we are key players in human history on the stage of God's beautiful creation. There is something that needs to be done in God's creation that only you can do. I can't. Some way of loving the world around us that only you can do. I can't. And God is calling us forward to express that love, to stand against the powers that would tear it down. God's calling us to live lives of importance. We're afraid sometimes of that. What'll happen? What's next? What's next is that God takes hold of our lives and ultimately defeats the powers. The power of tyranny, the power of lies and false religion. Our God meets humanity with an overwhelming sense of love and creative conviction. Those times are here. The trumpet sounds, and the reason I'm preaching this is because it's a good idea to assess from time to time where we want to stand and how we want to be. I was telling Craig before the service that as I've been working through the Revelation to John, I have a feeling that sometimes that the sermons are too big. Too big for me, anyway. They're too big because they cover the whole sweep of human history. And yet that is what every one of us is invited to live into. It's actually exciting. It gives life meaning. It gives life strength, and you don't have to be afraid because the hand of God is holding on to you in life and in death. Those times are here. Where do you want to stand? Whatever burden weighs you down, whatever flaw, whatever trauma you've experienced or dream that's been left unfulfilled in your life, know this. You are an expression of the creative love and power of God. You cannot be separated from God's love. God seeks your perfection and not your destruction.